1919 was an auspicious year in history. The First World War ended, ushering a drastic change in the world order. The Philippine Islands had been a U.S. territory for 2 decades and was promised independence under the Jones Law of 1916. Progressive reformers saw the country and its people as a major target for modernization, and education was its main weapon. 7 forward-looking Filipinas came together in 1919 to create a school where young women could gain the knowledge and skills that would make them modern women. Paz Marquez Benitez was the first president of the Philippine Women's College. Jose Abad Santos was its first chairman of the Board of Trustees. Francisca Tirona Benitez was the second president, and with her husband Dean Conrado, guided the school from a house on A. Flores Street to its iconic Taft Avenue campus. In 1932, the college became a university, making PWU the first university for women in Asia founded by Asians. It provided a space where innovations in education flourished, and young people were encouraged to be the best that they could be. For over 100 years, the Philippine Women's University has been known as a leader in quality education. In 1934, PWU moved into its main campus on Taft Avenue, and since the 1970s has been co-educational. Located in the heart of Metro Manila, it is easily accessible by public transport and surrounded by affordable housing. Today's PWU offers undergraduate and graduate courses in several fields of study. Its business and management programs are responsive to the needs of industry, using evolving technology for global competence. PWU graduates excel in arts and sciences, education, social work, and diplomacy. Its fine arts and music programs have produced outstanding graduates through a holistic education that treasures heritage as well as excellence. PWU has pioneered in fields such as food science, nutrition and dietetics, medical technology, pharmacy, and nursing. PWU continues to play an essential role in producing graduates who possess the skills that make them competitive in the country and anywhere in the world.
Hello, everyone. I am Maria Bienvenida T. Candelaria, your School of Fine Arts and Design Research Coordinator. Welcome to the School of Fine Arts and Design Master of Fine Arts and Design Visual Arts Research Colloquium. We are honored to witness an activity which is another learning experience for both speakers and audience. Your presence provides warmth as we participate in this noble endeavor. In this light, we acknowledge the presence of Dean Josephine Turalba, M.FAD Program Coordinator Mervy Pueblo, our speakers Marlon Barnuevo and Christopher Gozum, our dear SFAD faculty members and M.FAD students. After the visual arts research presentation, the audience may participate in the question and answer portion. Thus, they will be asked to raise their hands using the Gmeet Goo tool. May I now give the floor to our graduate program coordinator, Mervy Pueblo.
Thank you, Architect Candelaria. So, welcome everyone to this event. I hope everyone had a great day. PWU School of Fine Arts and Design is pleased to have you today. And in the next few minutes, we'll unpack the visual art research of our two candidates. But before we begin with their presentation, we would like to share with you the SFAD perception on visual art research. SFAD believes that visual arts has not reached its final frontier. The knowledge, definition, and meaning of art or aesthetic is forever subjective, hence, it is never established. Therefore, conversation on the visual arts field or paradigms are still ongoing. And here in the community, each artist researcher is encouraged to join the conversation by sharing their claim. So, testing one's knowledge and understanding of art or the individual aesthetics and finding possible answers or solutions to the questions or problems that the claim has posed. Thus, this makes the research as a visual arts inquiry. So the artist researcher asks with great humility these basic questions. What is art and design? Does art or design matter? What is my art? And what is the gift of my art to humanity? What is good art or bad art? Is my art a selfish endeavor, etc.? And many more questions. But these questions draw out the philosophical assumptions of the artist researcher on visual arts. Once their assumptions are clarified and tested, it can motivate them to seek its relation with other concepts they hope to investigate or understand. Visual art research demonstrates that knowledge is derived from doing and from senses. It extends the understanding of the process and methodologies of practice led research or research led practice as production of knowledge and assessing the potential impact of such research within the discipline and also the broader cultural arena. And today, our M.FAD candidates have explored their concerns in art and life through interdisciplinary art practices and multimedia. This visual arts research colloquium features experiments or studies by the 2021 graduating students who have spent an entire M.FAD studies creating and writing the research report and developing each of their authentic artistic perspectives. Congratulations to our 2021 M.FAD candidates and welcome everyone to our SFAD Visual Arts Research Colloquium.
So that at this point, the visual arts research presentations are about to begin. We have two of our speakers, namely Marlon Barnueva and Christopher Gozum. So please brace yourself. Let's hear the colloquial speeches of our speakers.
Good day, everyone. My name is Marlon Barnuevo. I'm an industrial designer, and I've been teaching in Benil for 10 years and in Miriam College for 7 years now. I'm also active in the OPM industry as a songwriter and a record producer, and I have been an advocate for Tourette syndrome awareness since 2001 through my organization, PTSA. My thesis is entitled Advocating for Industrial Design in the Philippines Through Design Activism. According to Sfad, to Anthorpe, and Tim Brown, designers use the power of design as a tool for social change. However, in this study, I deliberately split design activism into two roles: the internal role that calls for changes within the local ID community, and the external role, which deals with design for social change. So in my thesis, I focus on the internal role of design activism, but without necessarily ignoring the importance of the external or the original role of design activism. Now, why is there a need to advocate for industrial design locally? We have been producing industrial designers locally since 1976. And in keeping with the very definition of industrial design, the curriculum of most schools here are dominated with real ID competencies meant to prepare students for real ID jobs. Now, for the record, let me clarify. I'm not using this as a derogatory term in any way to invalidate furniture and crafts and graphics as non-ID. ID talaga just happens to be a colloquial term among Filipino industrial designers that we use when referring to consumer industrial products. Because as ID educators, including myself, we always preach that ID is more than just about designing pretty objects that sell. This is in fact reflected by the works of ID students abroad, students here in the Philippines, and by the works of a few Filipino industrial designers who are based here. Yet majority of ID graduates in the Philippines end up in graphics and advertising jobs. Only around 20% become furniture and craft designers. Barely 7% made it as real ID practitioners, and the remaining ones end up in other jobs. We are underutilized. We've been underutilized. And the perceived reasons, wala kasing manufacturing dito, we're very unpopular, etc., etc. Pero pag tinanong mo naman, will our country benefit from real ID projects? Every Filipino industrial designer will answer yes. In fact, there are local ID schools now who are revising their curriculum to focus on technologically innovative product design in response to what we now call the fourth industrial revolution. Now, there has been countless suggestions and efforts made to promote ID, but none has been done yet at a collective level. Most efforts, I believe, done by individual institutions tend to serve their own agenda and do not necessarily represent the entire Filipino ID community, including the academe. Plus, I believe hindi tayo makausad-usad together because of certain roadblocks. The first roadblock is the absence of a united front. Nobody takes care, sadly, of the welfare of Filipino industrial designers. In particular, NCIDP or National Council of Industrial Designers of the Philippines, yes, they exist, but sadly, and with all due respect, they have been very, very inactive. The second roadblock is our obsession with foreign validation. Striving for becoming world-class for the pursuit of excellence is good. Let me be clear on that. Their success is good for the country. I admire these people, for the record. But I think there's a problem with how many Filipinos perceive their success. Like, after the international success of Manny Pacquiao, let's say Lea Salonga and Kenneth Cobonque, did their successes significantly improve the welfare of sportsmen, theater actors, and industrial designers locally? I have seen for myself how relying too much on the glow of their success blinded some of us and made us ignore what's really on the other side of the fence. The third roadblock is more of a rhetorical question that does not necessarily have a strict answer. Ang Pinoy daw, walang pagpapahalaga sa design. But I cannot help but ask, could this be the cause or the effect? I believe Filipino industrial designers must start a discourse on this because the insights from this discourse could lead to better decisions as to how and why we should start designing for the Filipinos too. Fourth roadblock, and I actually forced myself to be brave enough to make this claim, that we as a people are experiencing what I call a design drain. Again, I admit this is rhetorical. This deserves more research, but I was able to describe it albeit briefly in my thesis manuscript. It makes me ask, totoo ba? Is it true? The better a Pinoy or Filipino design is, the more it becomes inaccessible to Filipinos. Last but not the least, I claim that there is an elitism of Filipino product design, and this makes it even much harder to convince people that certain design issues, like the motorcycle barrier you see here on the right, is actually supposedly under our specialization. And because we do not talk about these things openly, there are now a lot of misconceptions about industrial design. Industrial design has been very much typecasted or even institutionalized almost as a profession that is limited only to designing furniture and crafts. Yes, we are faced with all these challenges. Ang dami ko sinabi. But sadly, it seems to me that nobody wants to talk about this, most especially at a collective level. Now, in my paper, I actually outlined an array of proposals that I'll be glad to share also in the future. But for my VAR output, I have chosen this direction because when it comes to activism and advocacy, no other medium is as powerful as social media nowadays. That is why, to advocate for industrial design, I have chosen to maximize the power of social media through the Industrial Design Advocacy PH page. Now, why Facebook? While Facebook comes to a close second to YouTube in terms of popularity among Filipinos, Facebook allows users to like, to share, and to tag people with so much ease. That is why in as short as 16 days, the first video I posted has already reached over 10,000 people. And you see, almost every ID school and organization in the country have their own social media pages. And for the most understandable reasons, their pages only portray the positive in Filipino industrial design. Nobody talks about the problems I presented to you earlier. Industrial Design Advocacy PH addresses this gap by being disruptive. Aside from its candor, this Facebook page provides a venue for Filipino industrial designers to freely engage in discourse. I have also designed the appropriate branding for this endeavor and to further strengthen the message that we are trying to get across. And this is also to ensure that we are projecting a stronger sense of seriousness and urgency. I even went as far as composing the musical scoring for all the video materials to strengthen the branding further. More importantly, the Industrial Design Advocacy PH page aims to begin advocating for industrial design through a series of short video blogs and memes that are written and produced with the intention of becoming viral. And in its first 16 days, we have reached over 17,000 people. No boosting, wala akong ginastos. And as of yesterday, it's a little over 20K already. And it's part of my foresight that with the continuous growth of these metrics, more and more Filipino industrial designers will talk about the problems of ID in the country more openly. And as more people talk, the more solutions can be brought out to the open, and hopefully more programs and actions will arise as a result of these discussions, bringing us closer to the dream of making ID known, appreciated, and utilized in the Philippines. This is Industrial Design Advocacy PH. Please do support this page on FB. Thank you again, and good morning po sa inyong lahat.
Yes, thank you, Marlon Barnuevo, for that very enlightening colloquial speech. So at this point, we'd like to hear from our next speaker, Christopher Gozum.
Hello, good morning everyone. Masanto siya kabasan. I'm Christopher Gozum from Bayambang, Pangasinan. I'm an educator and artist and cultural worker based in my hometown, Bayambang, since 2015. So I'll start now with my presentation. The title of my presentation is Iner Sunakar Daray Pumupugon, or in the Pangasinan language, it means where did the pugon makers go? So next slide, please. Bani Paradise is a hilly terrain with scenic views in my hometown of Bayambang. Ordinary folks appropriated this private land in Barangay Bani and turned it into a biker's den, family picnic grounds, and a dating spot at night. Next slide. In 2018 to 2019, I organized the Bayambang Culture Mapping Project supported by the local government of the municipality, the Center for Pangasinan Studies, and the Bayambang National High School. One of the local cultural forms we documented is the pugon stove making tradition of Barangay Bani. Next slide. So when I entered the MA-FAD in the PWU in 2019, I became interested in the traditional pugon stoves of Barangay Bani as a visual form. The traditional pugon stoves is a folk assemblage using local earthenware clay and recycled metals. It is a functional sculpture and an artisanal craft that bears the identity of my hometown. Next slide, please. So the traditional pugon stoves of Barangay Bani is a fixed language. As an artist researcher, I was finding out what are the possibilities of using the traditional elements of the craft and applying them to contemporary language. I would also like to learn traditional skills from the artisans by working with them in creating modern pugon pieces. And lastly, I wanted to contribute to the sustainability of the pugon stove making craft in Bayambang. And so this research and study project was born. I called it Curating Collaborative Design Learning Activities for the Pugon Artisans of Bayambang, Pangasinan. Next slide, please. So what is curating collaborative design learning for the Pugon artisans of Bayambang, Pangasinan? Next slide. So it means artists or designers learn traditional skills while working with Pugon artisans of Barangay Bani in creating modern Pugon pieces. Likewise, the Pugon artisans learn to work with artists or designers in creating the modern pugon pieces. The collaborative setting is rooted in the materials, techniques, and process of the traditional pugon craft of Barangay Bani. So this idea or concept of collaborative design learning is a concept developed by researchers Zolaika and Brereton in 2011 of the Queensland University of Technology in their study on the sustainability of traditional craft industries in Indonesia. Next slide, please. So curating means planning and crafting engaging and meaningful collaborative design learning activities for the pugon artisans. It has 4 stages: culture mapping of the traditional pugon craft, curriculum writing, facilitating the collaborative design learning activities, and reflective practice. Next slide. So the process of creating these collaborative design learning activities is shaped by 3 factors. 1, the expected learning outcomes. 2, the local context of the pugon stove making tradition. And 3, principles in designing well-structured creative activities. So what are the initial gains of this project? Next slide. So we need a longer engagement with the pugon artisans to see long-term changes. Longer engagement means working with the artisans over a course of a few years. So this project is exploratory. I am charting out the possibilities of a long-term engagement or collaboration with the pugon artisans of my hometown. So next slide, please. So these are now some of the modern pugon accent lights as well as terracotta wall mirrors we have collaboratively designed and made with the pugon artisans of Barangay Bani. So next slide. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide, please. Next slide. So this collaborative design learning project with the pugon artisans brought me to unexpected places, an uncharted territory I did not foresee during the planning stages of the research. Next slide, please. So the title of the art installation, Iner Sunakar Daray Pumupugon, or Where Did the Pugon Makers Go, gives us a clue. Next slide, please. So in the first quarter of 2020, I started visiting the pugon artisans in Sitio 7 Gats, Barangay Bani. In early January 2021, I returned to them to formally start my project. The artisans were gone in their homes beside the national road. All that was left in their former home workshops were concrete bubble. Next slide, please. So I learned that they were relocated to an interior site called Sitio Pukdol, which is also located in Barangay Bani. Next slide, please. So the project started to take a different turn and unfold in unexpected ways when I began the first stage of the research, which is the culture mapping of the pugon craft. Next slide, please. So the culture mapping stage is the most crucial part of the collaborative design learning project because it grounds the artist or designer to the local context of the pugon craftspeople. Next slide, please. So the local context of the Pugon craft and the artisans include the elements of the traditional form, like the materials, techniques, and process. It also includes the economic and political circumstances confronting the craftspeople. Next slide, please. So the local context of the Pugon artisans contains their narratives as local culture bearers and residents in a highly disputed or contested rural community. Next slide, please. So what narratives were unearthed when the local context of the Pugon artisans were studied? Next slide. First is the value of the artisans as local culture bearers is underappreciated in the community. They are looked down and frowned upon by residents in the barangay. Next slide. Number 2, major development projects intended by the local authorities for Barangay Bani has started to disrupt the lives of the Pugon artisans in all levels. Next slide, please. The Pugon artisans of Sitio 7 Gods are vulnerable to threats from major development projects because their traditional craft depends on the resources of the land. Next slide, please. Quiet resistance is felt in the tone of the voices of the artisans, and they refuse to wallow in desperation. They remain strong. Life must go on despite difficulties. Next slide, please. So, how important is the local context of the artisans and their counterpart narratives in the collaborative design learning project? Next slide. So, identifying the local context of the Pugon craft became the foundation of the collaborative design learning activities. Next slide, please. And understanding the local context of the Pugon craft during the culture mapping stage also became one of the main design methods used in making the modern Pugon pieces with the artisans. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So the local context of the Pugon craft became the images and the forms of the art installation. The narratives also provided the story arcs that shaped the art installation. Next slide, please. So we recreated a large hole at the center of the installation. The hole is where the artisans dig the earth and work clay they use for their Pugon stoves. Next slide, please. Next slide. So we recreated 6 abot or concrete holes where the artisans knead the earthenware clay for their Pugon stoves. 3 of these holes were filled with clay and water, while the other 3 were filled with the finished modern Pugon modern Pugon accent lights made during the collaborative design learning activities. Next slide, please. Next slide. So we picked up and transferred the broken blocks from the demolished concrete houses of the artisans at Sitio 7 Gods to the art installation site, creating the semblance of an abandoned home workshop of a Pugon artisan family. Next slide, please. Next slide. Then we installed the finished terracotta wall mirrors made during the collaborative design learning activities at the pit of the large hole. And we also turned on the modern Pugon accent lights during sunset, illuminating the 3 concrete holes. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So we built the site-specific outdoor art installation in a private land beside the St. Vincent Ferrer Prayer Park with the colossal engineered bamboo statue of the town's patron Saint San Vicente Ferrer in the background. Choosing the right location for this installation was crucial. Meaning is embedded in the siting of the installation. The site-specific outdoor art installation was mounted at the heart of a highly contested or highly disputed rural community. Next slide, please. Then we, next slide, please. So then we surrounded the 49 square meter structure with painted yellow plywood panels. The enclosed space suggests an abandoned Pugon workshop that was the site of a violent act or crime. The site demands closer scrutiny and eventually empathy from the public. Next slide, please. But in contrast, there are signs of activity. Next slide, please. And there are signs of activity and life in the abandoned Pugon workshop. Next slide, please. So, next slide, please. Next slide. So these are just some of the stories the Pugon artisans shared to me during the past weeks while working and learning with them. Our ancestors were known not just as Pugon makers, but also as makers of handmade guns. Next slide, please. Our lives were severely disrupted when we were asked to leave our old houses. In our unfinished house at Pugdol, we can't sleep when it rains at night. The rainwater enters from the unfinished roof and floods our bed. Next slide, please. There was a large abot in our old house that can accommodate 3 Pugon artisans all at the same time. Now it is all buried in rubble, but it's still there. It will come out if we patiently unearth the broken concrete blocks. Next slide, please. So we will have a picnic in the hills at night. We will cook arroz caldo and sing love songs to our heart's delight, and then we will watch the stars all night long. Next slide, please. So this is image showing the palba or the open fighting of the modern Pugon Knights. And next slide. More images of the installation during the exhibit days. Next slide, please. Next slide. Next slide. Balik salamat and thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Christopher Gozum.
So thank you, Marlon and Christopher, for your researches. As we noticed in your research, Marlon have made an advocacy in order to give voice to the industrial designers, whereas for Christopher, he made an installation piece to talk about the struggles of people from Bayambang, the artisans, to be more specific. And now, oops, sorry. Okay, so at this point, we welcome questions from audience, and to those who don't want to open their videos, it's totally okay. You can type in your questions or you can raise your hand if you want to be heard, or if you have questions for Christopher and Marlon. Okay, I guess our audience are quite shy. All right, so maybe I'll start with the question first. Like, for Marlon and Christopher, what was the struggle when you were creating your art project or your research? What was the most difficult part, and how did you overcome that? Maybe we'll start with Marlon.
Yeah. As for me, what I really found difficult was finding the right VAR output or exhibit output, because it was actually intentional. I kept that part really open when I started the research. And if you remember, Miss Mervy, we really went through that stage of helping me trying to figure out what to produce as an output. And of course, with your help, with Sfad's help, with the dean's help, and my advisor, we were able to finally zoom in on that probably the most appropriate output. Surprisingly, to me,
Mhm.
I was personally surprised at the end that that was actually my output. So I,
Yeah.
I'm very pleased.
Yeah, you did an excellent job that you were able to find a path for your research, and you did a good job that you're working with multimedia, talking to the virtual space, especially now with the pandemic. It is the most effective means to reach out to people. So, yeah. So, how about Christopher? What was the most difficult part when you're creating that project?
Okay. For my research, since I'm doing there's an educational component in my research wherein I'm working with craftspeople and initiating learning activities with them. My issue was how committed were these participants, these young artisans in the learning activities. So I was a bit worried at the beginning. I was thinking, will these learners or participants stick until the very end of the learning activities? And fortunately, and by God's grace, they went through the whole process, the learning activities, and they were committed. Because they realized the value or the importance of what we're doing, it would really, it would benefit them in the long term. So that's one aspect. Another issue I was concerned with regards naman to the output, the art installation that summarizes the narratives, the social narratives of the crafts people I've been working with for like 1 year or 2 years, is since I'm trying to present their narrative, and the work I'm presenting is critical of authorities, of local authorities. I was a bit worried because maraming makakabangga. We are critical of economic programs or local development programs by the mayor. So I have to design my installation in such a way that the message is subtle. It's critical, but it creates awareness of how development projects are sensitive to local context, especially in communities where we have local culture bearers or crafts people. So I have to design it in a way that it's subtle, it's not direct, but the message should come across to the public clearly. And the intention of creating awareness should be reached. So that was my concern. These are two concerns that eventually were resolved, and ano naman,
Yeah, great. I know that it's quite challenging that you had to go to the site and talk to people, but it's great that you were able to build that sense of community with them and able to resolve your concerns. Thank you, Chris. So we have a question here. Let me just read out. This is from Architect Candelaria. This is a question for Marlon. So how do we prevent brain drain in the Philippines?
Okay, thank you for that question, ma'am. I actually have three answers for that, if I may. One, we definitely have to have to prevent that kind of brain drain in the arts and design. We really need to have more discussions regarding this particular issue and the other issues that I mentioned in future forums, not only in IT but in other creative industries. Second answer to that is, no, right now the government is looking into, and a lot of people have been lobbying to look into develop the newest policy in creative industry. So um, this has to be looked into also, and how the creative industries and the government can improve the how Filipinos appreciate the creative industries, particularly the ones involved in art and design. And thirdly, DepEd must seriously review the concept of MAPE. Imagine 12 years of the arts, but our appreciation of the arts in general, including music, because I'm also there,
Mhm.
ay napakababa po. So I think DepEd must seriously look into reviewing MAPE. And personally, if it needs to be abolished, sorry to say this, baka kailangan gawin yan.
Yeah, that's a good standpoint. That's a very strong standpoint from Marlon. Thank you so much. And let me just read another question from Architect Candelaria, which is addressed to Christopher. So, how does the Pagon project, or maybe to rephrase your question, um, would you think the Pagon project could um, inspire other designers to start working with the same crafts that these artisans from Bayambang have made,
yes.
right?
um,
Mhm,
okay, thank you, Professor Candelaria, for your question.
mhm,
On my case, since I'm based in a regional community, so the direction to go for local artists or local designers like me is to work with um, local craftspeople, collaborate with them in creating. It's either help make their traditional works sustainable, or encourage them to innovate, to engage in design innovation, to create new forms out of their traditional designs. Because their traditional designs are already they are a fixed language, but the designer or the facilitator or the educator encourage or open up the minds and the hearts of these craftspeople to see the benefits of the long-term benefits of engaging in design and innovation in terms of economic gains, in terms of opening up new income streams, in terms of attracting a new customer base. Because based on my research, the Pugon craftspeople in my hometown has already a fixed customer base. But as a researcher and a designer coming from outside their group or their family, there's the possibility of enriching the form and providing more income streams to them if they engage in creating new designs based on the craft, the elements of the craft, the materials of the craft, and those things. So that was the direction I was looking into for this project, and my research is exploratory. I really want this to be a long-term parang investment, long-term project with the craftspeople. And I'm looking into collaborating not just with the craftspeople in my hometown, but with other practitioners of traditional pottery in other towns, because we have a very rich pottery tradition in Pangasinan that practices traditional pottery, municipality of Binmalay and municipality of San Carlos. And there's another town called Santa Barbara where they make traditional earth bricks, yung mga nilalagay sa simbahan and sa mga buildings, used in architectural cladding. So ang daming possibilities. And apart from that, we have abundance of materials from we have zeolite natural stone, which can be used in sculptures and in craft design. And we have all forms of clay in several municipalities in Pangasinan. So there's a lot of possibilities, and we need to, as a home-based regional artist or designer and educator, ito yung thrust ko for in the next few years. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. So from what I'm hearing is that both you and Marlon have tried to map the design or the art ecosystem in the Philippines, and how the discussion on art and design is not just exclusive in art education. It also has to, the community as a whole has to be involved. So yeah, these are good observation that that you both did in your research. So there is another question from the SDA Industrial Design Chair, Mr. Professor Romeo Catap, and this is what he typed in. To Sir Marlon, thank you for the very enlightening talk regarding the industrial design state in the Philippines. It is real, uncensored, and legitimately speaks of the struggle that we industrial designers should get or improve out of. My question is, for academic institutions like on PWU and BNIL, etc., what should be found in their core vision in addressing these issues? What could we do as academicians, as ones responsible in laying the foundation of the industrial design into the future real industrial designers?
Thank you, sir. I can easily imagine a lot of ideas to add to the core vision and everything else that is involved in that. I even developed a 3-point agenda for the academy. It's in my manuscript, and I'd be very, very happy to share it, of course, with my home campus, Binild. But I'll have to apologize for not answering this as directly as I should. But let me ask, sir, kailan ba huling nag-usap-usap ang mga ID chairs from all schools? I believe the answer to that question, sir, will be more significant if it will come from that collective. Yun po yung aking sagot.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so let me read another question from Professor Leo. For Sir Marlon and Sir Christopher, what will be your next step, and how school or universities can help in attaining your ultimate goals?
Okay. Siguro I'll answer first. Is that
Okay, Chris.
Yeah. Siguro, like here in Pangasinan, we have several secondary and either private or public and tertiary or the colleges and universities that offer art or design related courses like architecture. So I think these institutions must, especially in regional communities or the provinces, um, one of their thrusts should be to localize or contextualize um, the art education context, meaning the researches, the projects, the curriculum must be integrated in the learners or the community's local context for it to be really meaningful and really grounded on the realities of the needs and realities of the learners and the entire community. So I think that should be the thrust. And DepEd is already doing that. They have a localization and contextualization thrust. And in collaboration with the National Commission on Culture in the Arts, they have the PCEP or the Philippine Cultural Education Program or Pagsasanay sa Edukasyong Pangkultura, and they have conducted seminars already in the past 2 to 3 years nationwide, and I've attended one or two seminars. And the thrust is really to develop localized lesson exemplars or examples that really integrate the lessons, the content of the lessons, the strategies to the local context of the learners, the local community. So the education would be more, art education would be more meaningful and grounded to the realities and needs of the community and the learners.
Thank you, Christopher. Sir Marlon.
Thank you, Sir Leo. As for me, when it comes to a specific next move, I'd like to address the lack of a strong community, a united front, particularly for students. No, to date, there's still no uh, organization or coalition of industrial design students in the country. So I'm seriously looking into that because it's in my paper. I really believe that the power to mobilize this, to make this really work, is in the youth, no? And sadly, a lot of us na nasa age natin, sorry to say this, have sort of given up already on that dream. So I would rather invest on the dreamers. Doon ako sa mga may time pang mangarap. And I know, hopefully, if I since I was able to talk to these students from the different schools, no, maybe in the coming days, I'll convene them and then maybe convince them to come up with this coalition of young industrial designers to augment and to support the existing organizations and movements now.
Thank you, Sir Marlon. All right. So, anyone else would like to ask a question? All right. So, maybe I'll have one last question for the both of you. Okay. So, do you think that the government should also look into exploring in creating a design policy wherein in order for the society to benefit from having design or use design thinking in the development of not just art products or product itself, but also in building systems? So, what do you think? Should government also explore in creating design policies?
May I? Hello. Yeah.
Okay.
Actually, there's already an existing design policy. This is the Republic Act
Oh, good.
10557.
Mm-hmm.
There's the Philippine Design Competitiveness Act of 2013. So I think it's just a matter of implementation, just like many other laws that we have out there.
Can you specifically state what is that design policy? Does it include how design can help companies develop their systems,
Ex-
how design can help communities, and if the government would have like support system, like provide small and medium industries to develop their businesses. Is that included in the design policy?
Yes, correct, miss. All those stipulations and many more are actually there. And while it can be subjected to different interpretations, if you remember one of my presentations before,
Mhm.
um, I find that a lot of the stipulations there are actually very much connected to the what we offer in the curriculum in most schools. So again, it's just a matter of implementation and developing the appreciation really for design.
Okay, great. How about your thoughts, Chris?
On my side, I think the what we should do is we should create awareness of these design policies created by government agencies like DTI or Design Center of the Philippines, or by lawmakers like Representative Christopher De Venecia. They should be made known to the public, either especially in local government units all over the Philippines, because and this should be ingrained in the minds of our politicos, our politicians. The design thinking, the design policies should be integrated in governance, in local governance, and also in the public educational system. We should have more create more awareness on what are existing policies, programs,
Mm,
and regulations with regards to the design and the creative industry sector in the Philippines. So kailangan makarating, should come to our level also, since I'm based outside from the capital, from Manila. These especially your advocacy, Sir Marlon. I think sana it would also reach us here in Region 1, and siguro
mhm,
please share your hopefully you can have your videos shared to us here, and I'll share
mhm.
it to my students and with other artists here in Pangasinan. So public awareness, I think, is one in all levels, local governance and public educational system, DepEd, and higher educational institutions, especially in the regions outside of the NCR. Yun. Thank you.
I'd love that, sir. Thank you, thank you. I'd love that.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you both. And indeed that it is a collaborative effort for us to think about how art and design can really contribute in developing our country to be more progressive, and not just our country, but even for small communities to develop. So, from what I hear from you both in your research and reading your research, there are five sectors that we have to look into, which would be: one is promotion and awareness, as you both have mentioned. Second would be support and funding from our national government and from private sector. Third would be the education and research. Fourth would be the design sector. And lastly, five, the public sector and government. So these are the five um, ecosystem, or these are the five in units in our ecosystem that can actually help develop design and art, and how those art and design would help make our country more progressive. So there is a last question from Architect Candelaria, and I'd like to read it here. So, would you say that collaborative efforts across discipline is one way of producing better design outcomes? I think, yeah, maybe you could just answer that. It's
Yeah,
somehow related to what I said earlier, but yes, go ahead.
thank you, thank you. Yeah, ako, to be more specific, I think it's prudent for me to answer for the industrial design community.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I would love to continue working with to be more specific, Design Center of the Philippines, definitely. No, it benefits us both. But I think the industrial design community and the schools would also benefit from exploring and collaborating with other agencies like the OST. And this is I am actually very very adamant on this one. My colleagues here know that. No? And again, without abandoning the existing collaborative effort that we've been doing already, augmenting it with more collaborations with other entities that we may not be that used to, will probably bring us more growth than before.
Thank you.
Uh, yes,
Yeah, go
on my
ahead.
side naman, it's yeah, the direction really is to go interdisciplinary approach. We engage with other government institutions, like we collaborate or engage with other institutions like the OST. That they can provide the funding, the technology on creating better works. But from a regional perspective naman, I think it's also good to collaborate with the underrepresented sectors. Like for example, on my research, I'm working with local craftspeople, and these are basically in our community. They're looked down upon. They're not recognized even by the local government. We should work with all of us stakeholders, even the underrepresented or the marginalized groups, to really come up with a holistic and responsive and meaningful work for the community. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and also for the design sector, the education sector, and government sector to provide support and funding to these indigenous communities, right? Like
Yes.
help them to develop their craft, help them in accounting or how they can grow their business. Those are things that they could look into. I think from reading in between the lines of your research as well. So thank you, Christopher. So there's this question from one of our M.FAD students, Limuel, and he asked from his M.FAD student perspective, what was the most critical or crucial part in your visual art research?
Hi, Lem. Lemuel Lapitan is actually one of my former students in Benilde. And to answer your question, I think it's really the study of all those theories and the research part, because we both understand that as industrial designers, we have that tendency to lean more on the technical side of design and ID. Not to say that malayo siya so to what we are doing here, but it's the set. These are sets of disciplines, so in research and looking at all these theories that really help us grow as artists and designers. And I do admit that this is that one part that I had struggled working in, especially that I took my master's 20 years after my graduation from college. So kayang-kaya mo yan, Lem. Kayang-kaya mo yan.
Thank you for the vote of confidence to our M.FAD students. How about Christopher? What was the most crucial part when you were doing your research? What was the most critical part for you?
Okay, sa akin naman, Lemuel, thank you for your comment or your question. On my side naman, it's since we're doing parang two works. We have the research, the paper, the manuscript, and the studio work, which is the output. My concern initially, like in midway when I was working on this thesis, was will the output or the studio work match or be in conjunction with the research? I was really concerned with that. Will the artistic work, the studio work, really reflect what was being presented, ideas being presented in the manuscript, in the research thesis? So I had that issue, and like midway through this research, and eventually through the guidance of Prof. Pueblo, Prof. Toralba, and my graduate advisor, Dr. Araneta, I was able to think of an artistic output that would really represent or encapsulate the whole journey and the whole the ideas of this concept called collaborative design learning, where in collaborative design learning we really have to understand the local context of the learners, the participants we are working with, we are designing the learning activities with. And eventually I came up with the art installation, because in the art installation it showed their narratives. At the same time, I was able to put there the mirrors and the pugon lights we have created during the learning activities, the collaborative design learning activities with the pugon crafts people in my hometown. So yun, kaya yan. Salamat.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for the candid response on what was the difficult part when you were starting with your visual arts research, finding the connection between the the theory and the creation. Yeah, and that's usually the struggle. But here, in our program in SFAD, once the assumptions are clarified by our artist researcher, they get to test it and then test it by creating the project. Then the creation of the project is in fact the method in gaining knowledge or the knowledge production. And that is where the interconnection happens when we do the research. So in our school, there is no real, we don't have a distinction between the creation and the writing. The writing is just the report of the creation, in fact. And that's what these two students have made, like Marlon and Christopher have did excellently. And so our two candidates were able to clarify their position. They got to test their theories by doing their project, and it motivated them to seek its relation with different ideas, with other concepts, and which they hope to investigate and understand, and brought this research that they've made. So um, I guess that's the last question that we have for now. And thank you everyone for joining us. And I believe Architect Candelaria, our host, would like to say a few words before we end our meeting or our event.
Yeah, thank you all for your kind presence. We hope everyone learned from this exercise as we continue to move forward to more innovative projects at the School of Fine Arts and Design. At this point, please be guided by the School of Fine Arts and Design, Master of Fine Arts and Design Visual Arts Research Agenda, and it is nurture globally competitive and relevant visual art research that expands knowledge, contributes new knowledge or new perspective specific to the discipline of the student and or faculty. With that, we'd like you to follow our PWU SFAD FB page as well to be updated of the latest news. So good morning, everyone, and have a pleasant day ahead.
Yeah, thank you everyone. Thank you from the Benilde community for joining us today. And thank you from the PWU admin who's here today. And thank you to our students who have joined us in this event. So have a great day, everyone. Bye.
Congratulations, Sir Christopher.
Congratulations to you both.
Thank you.
I'll stop the recording, Ms. Murphy. Okay.